Today, I'll show you what it looks like to manage a candidate's recruiting journey end-to-end with Tezi and Max. You'll see how Max helps you automate and speed up repetitive parts of the recruiting process while still keeping you in full control of your pipeline. First, we'll look at how to manage source candidates using a data scientist role at a demo company called Parks and Tech. For this role, sourcing is enabled, chat screening is enabled, specifically for source candidates. An interview plan is configured. It's an introductory call with me. And agentic email replies are not enabled, which is what we recommend for new users. To start getting source candidates into our pipeline, we can review candidates that Max has identified as strong fits for our search criteria. On my sourcing list, let's say I think this senior machine learning engineer is a great fit. I'll schedule them for outreach, and on the scheduled list, I can see that Max will contact them using an AI personalized message on Friday. On my pipeline view, I can see candidates that Max has already contacted. In this case, there is exactly one, Daniel, who was sourced October 15th. When I open Daniel's activity feed, I can see the message that Max sent Daniel. Because I'm on Max Lite, this message went out from my email address. If you're using one of our other tiers, you'll see Max sending outreach emails from an email address on the custom subdomain that your company configured for Tezi. Let's say that Daniel responds. What happens next? Well, first, Max will notify me over email. I'll click to review the candidate's message, and that lands me in tasks. I'll click through here, and in pipeline view, I can see that Daniel has responded and needs a reply from us. Clicking through to activity feed, I can read Daniel's message. He says, "Thanks for reaching out. Sounds pretty interesting. I'd love to learn more." Max has processed this email and, as we would expect, recommends advancing. Technically, I could also reject or reply without advancing if, for example, Daniel had asked a question. But in this case, I'll go ahead and advance him. Because I turned on the chat screen for source candidates, Daniel's next step is the chat screen, and I get this nice preview of that chat screen invite email. If I hadn't turned on the chat screen, the next step would be round 1, and I would get a preview of the interview scheduling email instead. And of course, if I want Daniel to skip the chat screen, I can still advance him straight to round 1 right now. But let's follow the configured flow and advance the chat screen. Now that I've advanced Daniel, Max will send the chat screen invite email in just a few minutes. Here is the email that Max sent Daniel to invite him to the chat screen, and I signed up. And now this is my / Daniel's chat with Max. Max will ask Daniel the questions that I provided Max during role setup. For example, the first question is, why are you on the market? For the purposes of this video, I'm going to speed through these questions as Daniel, but hopefully, as you ride along, this gives you a sense of what it's like to complete the chat screen as a candidate. After I've answered Max's questions, I actually have the opportunity to ask Max questions. For example, maybe I'll ask, what types of projects would I get to work on? Max will answer this question using the role and company context that I provided during role setup. If you're using the chat screen, I highly recommend fleshing out your role and company context so that Max can provide compelling, accurate answers to candidate questions. For now, I'm going to go ahead and tell Max that I'm out of questions, and that ends the chat screen. It's time for me, in my recruiter / hiring manager persona, to review the chat screen. When we load tasks now, there's a task to decision a candidate who we know to be Daniel. If I didn't catch this here, Max would email me about this tomorrow morning. But I'm here now, so I'll click through. This takes me to pipeline view, and then I will go to Daniel's activity feed. In the activity feed, I can see the full transcript of Max's chat with Daniel. I still think that Daniel is a great fit, so I will advance him. From my role configuration, I know that the next stage is the introductory call with me, and so in a few minutes, Max will send the scheduling invite email. A few minutes later, I refresh activity feed, and I can see that Max has sent the scheduling invite email. Now let's switch over to Daniel's side. When he receives this email and he clicks this button, he will land on this next screen. So now, pretending that we're Daniel, let's provide some basic information, including phone number, and confirm our time zone. Then we'll pick a time that works for the call. And voila, our interview is now confirmed, and both Daniel and I, as in the interviewer version of me, will receive calendar invites. In a few days after I interview Daniel, I'll get a task to decision him. I won't show it in this demo because it looks pretty much the same as the other tasks that we've seen today. Depending on what tier of Tezi you're using and whether you're also on our ATS integration, you may have the option to submit a scorecard as well. In my case, since I'm using Max Lite, I won't submit a scorecard, but I can decision Daniel. I can, for example, choose to reject him and then decide whether or not I want to send a rejection email from Max. I can also choose to advance him. Since I'm using Max Lite, I don't have any additional interview rounds configured beyond the first one. And advancing Daniel puts him in the last stage in my Tezi pipeline, which is quote unquote offer. I'll go ahead and move him there. Now, obviously, this is very artificial. And what it really means is that Max will take no further actions on this candidate. Now, I will need to manage the rest of Daniel's recruiting process outside Tezi. If I'm a recruiter, that could mean adding Daniel into my ATS in the next interview round. Or if I'm a hiring manager, maybe that means that I will forward him to the recruiting team that I'm working with. Either way, you have maximum flexibility to manage the next steps here in a way that makes sense for you and your process. In the last segment of today's demo, let's use this product designer role to see what the recruiting process looks like for an inbound applicant with Max. If you're using Tezi with an ATS integration, this includes applicants to your ATS JD. So as you can see, 2 inbound candidates have just applied. And I do mean literally just applied. I submitted these applications in the last minute or so, and that timing is important because Max will analyze these candidates within a few minutes of them applying in order to determine whether they match my search. So let's refresh and see Max's evaluations. All right. The first thing that I notice is that Tom is now in the chat screen stage. Let's click into his activity feed to see why. So expanding this status update, you can see that Max analyzed Tom's profile and based on the rationale here, decided that he was a good fit. Because I have chat screening enabled for inbound candidates on this role, Max then automatically advanced Tom to the chat screen. And if you think about it, this is actually pretty incredible because it means that Tom heard back within the first 10 minutes of applying. When Tom completes the chat screen, Max will notify me over email exactly like how this worked for the source candidate who completed the chat screen. And if I hadn't configured the chat screen, after Max thought that Tom was a good fit, Max would have emailed me to have me review Tom and decide whether or not to advance him to an interview. All right, so let's go check out that other candidate. What happened to Yvette? From this entry here, we can see that Max evaluated her and concluded that she doesn't match the location and startup experience requirements. It's important to note, though, that Max didn't notify Yvette. This email down here is just a standard thank you for applying email. And Max will never tell Yvette on its own that she's not a fit. We actually intentionally designed Max this way so that you can always override his recommendation and make sure you have the final call on any candidate. In this example, I'll pretend that actually Yvette has a stellar background for what we want, and I'm interested in knowing whether she's open to relocation. So I'm going to override Max's recommendation, and I'll advance her to the chat screen, where Max can actually help me ask about relocation. Right, that's it for today's demo. And now you know how Max can help you accelerate your recruiting process for every candidate. Let us know if you have any questions.